Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing super well. Happy New Year. I can't believe it's 2023. I feel like time goes by so quickly, but I'm so excited about this new year and I'm wishing you all an amazing 2023. I took the first 2 weeks of January off because I wanted to focus and kind of catch up on all the work. Researching these cases, writing the scripts, filming the videos, editing, it all takes a lot of time and I don't have anyone that does it for me. I do all the research myself, I do the editing myself, so it takes up a lot of time and I wanted to take the first 2 weeks of January off just so I could catch up, write as many scripts as possible, and start the new year off ahead. So thank you guys for being so patient and I'm so happy to be back posting videos. Today we're going to be talking about the murders of 4 young girls that took place inside of a frozen yogurt shop in Texas. This is my first time hearing about this case and my goal with this video is to help spread awareness and do my part in keeping the case alive. As usual, all of my sources will be linked in the description box down below, and if there's ever any cases that you would like me to cover, make sure to leave me a comment or you can submit it through my case suggestion form. I also want to mention that we do have a new addition to our weekly videos. Without La Familia, we wouldn't be here, and I want to say thank you by featuring one of you in each of my videos. All you have to do is be subscribed to my YouTube channel and you get bonus points if you engage with the video. I truly can't thank you guys enough, so make sure to stay tuned until the end of the video to see who our first Familia feature is. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. Let's jump right into today's video. So today we're going to be talking about 4 young teenage girls from Austin, Texas. Let's start off by talking about sisters Jennifer and Sarah Harbison. Jennifer was born on May 9th, 1974 and was the oldest of the 2 sisters. She was a senior at Lanier High School and everyone describes her as a very hardworking and social person. She had a lot of friends in the community and she enjoyed keeping herself busy. She was part of the Future Farmers of America program, also known as the FFA. She was actually the president of the program. Now, the FFA is a youth organization that prepares its members for leadership, personal growth, and career success through agricultural education. Members of this organization are future chemists, veterinarians, teachers, etc. You join this program if you're interested in agricultural and leadership, which Jennifer definitely was. She absolutely adored animals, and with the FFA program, she learned how to raise sheep and take care of other animals. Now, besides participating in this program, Jennifer was also busy acting as the manager of the school's drill team, and she also participated in the school's track and field program. So she was a busy girl, but again, she loved being active. During her senior year of high school, her parents actually bought her a brand new car. However, they did tell her that this car came with one condition. If she wanted to keep the car, she needed to find a job and help make the payments. Jennifer agreed to this condition, and that's when she came across an opening as a cashier at an I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop. This frozen yogurt shop was located in the 2900 block of West Anderson Lane in Austin, Texas, and it was a good job for a teenager to have. I know in high school a lot of my friends worked at the local frozen yogurt shop, so I feel like it's a pretty common job for teenagers to have. So Jennifer applied for the cashier job and she ended up getting hired to work at the counter. And she was excited about this job. She was going to be able to make her own money, she was going to help pay for her car, and it was just something new and exciting for her to do. I honestly don't know how she balanced so many things. I mean, she was the president of the school's FFA program, she was manager of the drill team, she was participating in track and field, and now she had this brand new job. There was just so much going on in her life, but overall it seemed like she was happy. Moving over to her younger sister Sarah. Sarah was born on October 28th, 1976, and the 2 girls had a very close relationship. They were only 2 years apart. Jennifer was 17 and Sarah was 15, so the girls often did similar activities together. Sarah was also very active and social in the community. She was a freshman at Lanier High School and she loved to play sports. She played basketball, volleyball, and was a member of the cheerleading squad. On top of that, Sarah also enjoyed spending times outdoor and she was also a member of the FFA program. So she would go to this program with her sister, and that's where they taught her how to raise lambs for the Travis County Livestock Show and Rodeo, and she just absolutely adored animals and also enjoyed collecting rocks and seashells. The girl's mother, Barbara, described them as wonderful, unique, and faithful girls. Now, Sarah had a best friend named Amy Ayers. Amy was born on January 31st, 1978. She was 13 years old, attended Burnett Middle School, and was also part of the FFA program, which is actually how she became friends with Sarah. They met through this program and they shared a love for animals. Since Amy was raised in ranches, she grew a love for animals and a passion for taking care of them. She actually dreamed of growing up, owning her own horses, and becoming a veterinarian. She would participate in competition shows in Texas, so she would show hogs at the Travis County Fair and Rodeo, and she also won the Arts and Crafts division of the competition at this fair. Amy also enjoyed going to the rodeo with her brother Sean, and she just loved doing anything that involved being outdoors or with animals. Last but not least, let's talk about 17-year-old Eliza Thomas. Eliza was born on May 16, 1974. She was a senior at Lanier High School and was also a member of the FFA program. She had a very close relationship with her mother Maria and with her younger sister Sonora. Sonora says that she absolutely adored her older sister and looked up to her. She was her rock and they had such a beautiful relationship. One of Maria's favorite memories with her daughter is when Eliza would go country dancing with her best friend Michelle. Michelle would come over to their house and the two girls would do their makeup together, they would do their hair, they would put on their outfits, and they would just have such a good time getting ready for this dance. Before they left the house, they would grab the camera and take photos with each other, and Maria says that this is such a beautiful memory she has of Eliza because it was just a moment where Eliza was so happy and excited about life. And Eliza was truly beautiful. She eventually wanted to get into modeling, and in order to build her modeling portfolio, she needed money. So that's when she decided it was time to find a job. She came across an opening at the I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop and applied for a position working at the counter. She nailed the interview and worked at the store for about a year before being promoted to shift leader. And Eliza really enjoyed working at the yogurt shop. It was a very simple, easy job. She was happy to be making her own money, and she eventually wanted to use that money to buy herself a car. Plus, she had Jennifer Harbison as her coworker, and the two of them were friends through school and through the FFA program. So overall, Eliza really enjoyed working at the yogurt shop. And those are the 4 girls we're going to be talking about in today's video. We have sisters Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, Amy Ayers, and Eliza Thomas. Jennifer and Eliza were co-workers at the yogurt shop, and Sarah and Amy were best friends. Now let's fast forward to Friday, December 6, 1991. That afternoon, Sarah Harbison arrived home from school and she asked her mother if she could go to the mall with her friend Amy. They just wanted to go walk around the mall for a bit, maybe get some pizza, and then later that night come back to Sarah's house and have a sleepover. Barbara agreed to this plan and she asked Jennifer if she could do her a favor and drop the girls off at the mall before heading to her shift at the yogurt shop. Now the mall was pretty close to the yogurt shop. It was about a 10-minute walk. So while Jennifer was at work, Sarah and Amy would be hanging out at the mall and then they would walk to the yogurt shop later that night, wait for Jennifer to get off work, and then Jennifer would bring the girls back to the house. That was the plan for that Friday night. At around 7 p.m., Jennifer left the house with her sister Sarah, dropped her off at the mall, and then headed over to her shift at the yogurt shop. Her coworker, Eliza Thomas, was already there. I believe she had gotten there about an hour before Jennifer had, and it was just going to be the two of them working the closing shift that night. Now let's talk a little bit about the yogurt shop. Customers described the shop as a very comfortable and safe place. It was very crowded during the weekends, and a lot of people from school and the neighborhood would go to this yogurt shop to hang out, eat some food. In fact, people felt so friendly and comfortable at this yogurt shop that sometimes the customers would stay back to help the girls close everything up. That's how comfortable they felt there. And the employees felt the same way. Oftentimes, the employees would count the money at the register without even locking the front door. That's how safe they felt there. So that Friday night, the yogurt shop was busy as usual. Lots of customers came in that night, and at one point, Maria Thomas, Eliza's mother, also stopped by to check in on her daughter. And this was a pretty common thing that the parents of the employees would do. Oftentimes, the only people working at the yogurt shop were teenagers, and even though everyone did feel very safe and comfortable in this community, the parents still just wanted to stop by just to make sure that their kids were okay, that nothing weird was going on at the store, things like that. So about an hour and a half before closing time at 9:30 p.m., Eliza's mother stopped by. Maria says that when she got to the store, it was pretty busy. There were a lot of customers inside, and one thing she did note was that Jennifer's sister, Sarah, and her friend Amy were already at the yogurt shop. They were sitting at a booth, eating some pizza, just waiting for Jennifer to get off work so she could drive the girls home. Besides that, she says everything at the yogurt shop was completely normal. No one stood out to her, nothing odd was going on, nothing. So she ordered herself some yogurt, and after a few minutes of hanging out there, she said goodbye to her daughter Eliza and left the store. Then, somewhere between 10:15 and 10:25 p.m., Eliza and Jennifer began cleaning up the shop and getting ready to close everything down. And this was pretty common for them to do. Even though the shop didn't close until 11 p.m., the girls would often start cleaning up early and, getting everything ready. That way, when the final customer would leave the store, all they had to do was quickly clean up that section and then they could finally go home. So Eliza and Jennifer began sweeping the floors, they began mopping, they were cleaning up the countertops, putting away all the food. They even had some extra help that night because Sarah and Amy decided to jump in and they were refilling the napkin dispensers, and everyone just wanted to clean up and get everything ready as quickly as possible. That way they could all go home as soon as possible and enjoy their Friday night. Now the rule for the store was to lock the doors 15 minutes before closing time, so at 10:45 p.m. That way people wouldn't be able to enter the store while the girls were cleaning up and counting the money. If there were still customers inside the store during those last 15 minutes, the girls would have to manually unlock the door, let the customers out, and then lock it once again. So at 10:42 p.m., the last few customers left the store and the girls followed behind them and locked the door before going back to cleaning. Now, one of these last few customers was a woman, and she says that when she was leaving the store, she noticed something odd. Everyone was pretty much gone at this point, and the only people left inside the store were Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy. But they weren't alone. Inside the store, there were also two men, and these two men were just sitting at a booth while the girls were cleaning up the store. And the woman thought this was odd because the two men didn't even have any yogurt with them. All they had was a can of soda, and they were kind of whispering to each other, and something about the situation just felt off. If these two guys weren't even eating frozen yogurt and all they were doing was drinking a soda, why were they still sitting inside the store when it was clearly getting ready to close down? Also, the fact that they were whispering to each other and just kind of being secretive made the woman feel uneasy. So she actually asked the girls if they were okay, if these guys were making them feel uncomfortable or anything like that. And the girls said that they were fine and that they were going to leave soon anyways. So since the girls said that they were fine, the woman figured that maybe she was overreacting and maybe these two guys were just, normal customers and nothing weird was going on. So in the end, she decided to leave the store. 15 minutes later, it was 11 p.m., closing time, which meant that the girls should have manually let out the two remaining men before closing everything up and heading home. However, 3 minutes after closing time at 11:03 p.m., there was a no sale rung up in the cash register. Now, this could mean a couple of things. Sometimes cashiers press this button when they want to get some cash out without actually making a sale. Maybe they want to give customers some change or, something like that. Or sometimes this button is pressed during a robbery. If someone comes into your store and asks you to empty the register, this is the button that you would press. So at 11:03 p.m., someone pressed that no sale button. Now, next to the yogurt shop was a party supply store. That night, the owner of the store was still there, just closing everything up, when all of a sudden he heard a sound coming from the roof of the building. Then he heard popping noises. So he looked outside the building, and that's when he saw that there was smoke coming from the front of the yogurt shop next door, and that the yogurt shop's back door was propped open. When he got a closer look, he saw that there were flames inside the yogurt shop. At the same time, an Austin police officer was on patrol when he also noticed that there was smoke coming from inside the yogurt shop and called the fire into dispatch at around 11:47 p.m. Dozens of firefighters and police officers arrived at the scene and began putting out the fire. Once the blaze was suppressed, firefighters entered the building, and that's when they came across a horrific scene. Fire Chief Rene Garza said that he was walking around the building looking at all of the debris when all of a sudden he was tapped on the shoulder by another firefighter. They asked him, "Is that a body?" Rene looked to the ground, and that's when he realized that yes, that was a body. Upon getting a closer look, he found two bodies piled underneath the first one. Then, just a couple of feet away from the three bodies, a fourth body was found. That's when he knew that something wasn't right. This wasn't just an accidental fire. This might have been a murder. After coming to this realization, Detective John Jones was called onto the scene. Now, John was actually filming with a news station that night. I believe CBS was going on a ride along with him because they were doing a segment about homicide in Austin, Texas. So there's actually footage of Detective Jones driving around that night and getting that dispatch call, which I think is pretty crazy. I mean, what are the odds that the night he was filming with CBS is the same night he received this phone call? So Detective John Jones pulled up to the scene and he says that it was just pure chaos. There were firefighters all over the place, police officers, ambulances, smoke, and a lot of water. He says that everything just appeared muted and that there was absolutely no color left inside the yogurt shop. Everything had been burned to a crisp, and there on the floor of the yogurt shop were the nude bodies of four young girls. 17-year-old Eliza Thomas, 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison, and 13-year-old Amy Ayers. All four girls were found stripped, bound with their own clothing, and shot in the head. The gunshot wounds showed that two different types of guns were used in the murders, a .380 and a .22. Eliza, Jennifer, and Sarah were found piled on top of one another. Amy was found a couple of feet away near the bathrooms, and she was actually shot twice. With this, detectives gathered that Amy had survived the initial shot and had managed to crawl to a different part of the building in an effort to escape, and that's when she was shot a second time, which ultimately ended her life. There were also signs that at least one of the girls had been sexually assaulted. And hearing this is just so heartbreaking. Thinking about what these four girls had to go through in their final moments just breaks my heart, and it just makes you so angry. I mean, this was just a typical Friday night. All Sarah and Amy wanted to do was go to the mall, eat some pizza, and then go back home to have a sleepover. Jennifer and Eliza were just there doing their job and trying to get home to go enjoy their Friday night, and then something horrific had to happen to them. It's just not fair at all. So now that detectives had identified the four victims and their cause of death, their next step was to figure out what had happened. Since the building had been lit on fire, there was smoke and soot on every surface. So finding any fingerprints or any potential evidence was going to be very difficult. Now the fire was centered towards the back of the yogurt shop where the bodies were found, and at first, detectives believed that maybe this was just a robbery. Some reports state that only $40 were missing from the cash register, but other reports state that up to $500 were missing. So I'm not really sure how much was actually stolen, but in the end, there was still some money in the register. So if this was a robbery, why would they leave this money behind? Also, there were no signs of a break-in. The front door was still locked, and it even had the key still inside the lock, but the back door was unlocked, and they also noticed that it had been propped open. So, in the eyes of detectives, this makes it seem like this was planned. Someone had come to the store, propped the back door open, and planned to come back later that night to either rob the girls or murder them. Moving over to the families and the public's reaction to this, I mean, you can just imagine how the family felt when they heard the news. The Harbison family had lost their only two children, Sarah and Jennifer. It just breaks my heart to know that these two sisters were murdered together, and just thinking about what they went through is so heart-wrenching. Their mother, Barbara, spoke with 48 Hours and said, "My life was focused around them from here to eternity. Someone took eternity away from me." My heart breaks for all the girls' families, but just knowing that Barbara lost her two only daughters, that is just so difficult to understand and to imagine having to go through, and my heart truly goes out to Sarah and Jennifer's family. Now, as for Eliza's family, they were just as distraught. Her younger sister Sonora says that she was having a very hard time dealing with the loss of her sister, and she just remembers being in shock. She would fantasize for days that her sister had somehow escaped the fire and had ran away and, was going to come back to her one day. She was so close to Eliza, and the loss of her sister affected her family so much that they never really talked about her because it was just too painful. And Eliza's mother, Maria, had actually gone to the yogurt shop the night of the murders. She was there just 2 hours before any of this had happened, and she said goodbye to her daughter before leaving the shop, not knowing that it would be the last time she would see her daughter. For the Ayers family, they just couldn't believe that Amy was gone. Her father, Bob, said, "I lost my daughter, I lost my first dance, I won't see her graduate, I won't see her become a veterinarian. She was a daddy's girl, and now she was gone forever." All the families were completely haunted by what had happened to their daughters, and all they wanted to know was, why did this happen and who did this? And the community felt the same way. This was a crime like no one in Austin had ever seen before, and it truly shocked the community. Photos of the girls were placed all over the town. There were billboards put up with the number to call in for tips. Their photos were placed on taxi cabs, and the owner of the yogurt shop even put up a $25,000 reward, which was eventually bumped to $100,000 for any information that would lead to the conviction of the people responsible for the murders. Faculty and staff members at Lanier High School met to discuss plans to provide counseling to students on campus. They ended up hiring private counselors and police officers from the Victim Service Department to come and speak with the students in school. They were really affected and frightened by what had happened. I mean, imagine learning that 4 students from your high school were brutally murdered at your local yogurt shop, and that the people responsible for this were still on the loose. It was just a very scary time, and a lot of parents were scared to let their children go out. Grieving friends and relatives of the girls placed flowers in front of the yogurt shop, and they also spray painted a black heart on the front door. Now, Detective John Jones was a parent himself, so he understood the pain that these families were going through. He promised to do all that he could to help the families, and he even made a pledge to them. The night of the murders, he pulled up to the scene wearing a green and white shirt, and he told the families that the next time he wore that same shirt would be the day that he had finally solved the case. Before he could pull out that green and white shirt, he knew that he had a very long and difficult investigation ahead of him. His first step was to track down any customers at the yogurt shop and see if any of them had noticed anyone suspicious throughout the night. And a couple of customers had. According to a witness named Daryl Croft, who was actually a former police officer, he was at that yogurt shop at around 10 p.m. the night of the murders. While he was standing in line waiting to make his order, he was approached by a man wearing a military-style jacket. This man told Daryl that if he wanted to, he could skip the line ahead of him and order before him. Along with that statement, he also asked Daryl if he was a police officer. Now, Daryl turned down the offer and told him that he didn't want to skip the line, and I don't know if he ever told him if he was a cop or if he kind of just brushed over the question. So when it was the man's turn to order, he ended up only ordering a soda. He didn't order any frozen yogurt, he didn't order anything else, just 1 can of soda. Then, after paying for his soda, he moved around the counter and started making his way towards the back of the shop. Now, Daryl thought this was pretty strange, so when it was his time to order, he asked Eliza, who was working the counter that night, where the guy had gone to. Eliza told him that the man had asked her if he could use a restroom, which was located in the back of the store. Now, something about this just felt odd to Daryl. The fact that this guy was asking people to skip him in line and had only ordered a soda, not any frozen yogurt, and then had immediately gone to the back of the restaurant with his soda, it just all seemed a little bit weird to Daryl. So after he got his yogurt, he kind of just hung around the yogurt shop waiting to see when the guy would come back. He waited and waited, but the guy never returned. Daryl said he couldn't wait any longer, so he had to leave the yogurt shop without ever confirming if the man had come back from the restroom. Thankfully, he was able to give a pretty detailed description of the man. He says that he was a white man about 6 feet tall, mid to late 20s, medium build with dark hair, clean shaven, a clear, deep voice, and a long, pointed nose. Now, Daryl wasn't the only witness who noticed something odd that night. A couple of customers described seeing 2 men that just seemed out of place. These 2 men were sitting at one of the booths, and they didn't buy any yogurt. The only thing they bought was 1 can of soda. One of the men is described as having light, short hair, kind of dirty blonde, and was about 5'6" and in his late 20s or 30s. The other man was described as being much bigger, and both of them were wearing pretty hefty coats. One of the men had on a green army kind of jacket, and the other had a black jacket. So maybe the man wearing the green army jacket is the same man that Daryl saw earlier that night. Also, remember how I mentioned at the start how there were 2 customers left inside the store, and that those 2 customers were 2 men that were sitting at a booth kind of whispering to each other and only had a can of soda? Police are thinking that the 2 men that all of these witnesses saw that night are the same 2 men, the last 2 people to have been seen inside the yogurt shop. And when you look at the crime scene photos, you can see that the majority of the tables have the chairs placed on top of them, even the booths, all except for one booth. The napkin dispenser at this booth is also the only one that wasn't filled. So why wasn't the napkin dispenser refilled, and why weren't there any chairs placed on top of this one table? Well, police believe that it's because the 2 men were still sitting there as the girls were closing down the shop. If the 2 men had actually left before the girls had closed everything down, the chairs would have been on top of the table, the napkin dispenser would have been filled, but since none of that happened, it really makes police wonder if the 2 men had ever left before the murders. So after hearing these witness statements, police did whatever they could to track down the 2 men, but unfortunately, they were never able to identify them. After reaching a dead end with that lead, detectives had their eyes on another person of interest. A couple of customers had seen a man sitting inside his car outside of the yogurt shop the night of the murder. And this guy was just sitting there. He wasn't eating any froyo, he wasn't having a can of soda, nothing. He was just sitting there staring at the store. These customers were able to make a pretty good composite sketch of the man, and once detectives got the sketch, they started sharing the sketch to other local police stations, asking if they had anyone in custody that matched this description or if they knew who this person was. And someone did. A couple of investigators from the sex crimes unit recognized the sketch and immediately called the homicide police department and told them, "We have a sketch that looks just like that." So 3 weeks before the murders, a young woman in Austin, Texas had been kidnapped and sexually assaulted. Police were never able to capture the people responsible for this, but the woman was able to give a pretty good description of the men, and one of those sketches matched the sketch from the man seen sitting outside of the yogurt shop. So once the connection was made, both units began working together to track down the man. That's when they received a tip letting them know that 2 of the men had fled to Mexico, were captured by Mexican authorities, and had confessed to the killings. When Detective John Jones heard about this confession and heard about these arrests, he was feeling a little bit hesitant about it. First of all, some of the details these 2 men had given about the yogurt shop murders didn't really match what actually had happened. For example, the type of they say was used to kill the girls did not match the ballistics found at the crime scene. So there were just too many inconsistencies in their confession. So when Detective John Jones interviewed these guys in person, they recanted everything. They took back their confessions, and this really made Detective John and a couple of other detectives wonder if maybe their confessions were coerced by the Mexican authorities. So after that lead fell apart, detectives went back to the drawing board and tried to find a new suspect. This is when they came across a teenager named Maurice Pierce. 8 days after the yogurt shop murders, Maurice Pierce was seen at the mall near the shop carrying a .22 caliber gun, the same type of gun used in the murders. So police arrested him, and when they asked him about the murders, he implicated 3 other boys, Forrest Welburn, Michael Scott, and Robert Springsteen. Detectives brought the 4 young men down to the station, and when they were questioned, they all denied killing the 4 girls. Maurice put the blame on Forrest and claimed that he had lent his gun to Forrest, who then used it to commit the murders. Of course, Forrest denied these allegations, and when police conducted a test to see if Maurice's gun matched the ballistics at the crime scene, the test came back as not a match. So, due to lack of evidence, police released the 4 men. After this, years would go by without any serious movement in the case. There were more people that came forward and confessed to the murders, but ultimately, those confessions turned out to be false. Detective John eventually moved out of the homicide division, and he says that this was a mutual decision because the Austin Police Department wanted someone to lead the case with fresh eyes. And at this this point, Detective John had been on the case for 3 years, and like I said, there really wasn't any movement going on in the case, so maybe it was time for detectives to come on and get a new perspective. Overall, the families were frustrated with the lack of movement in the case. Amy's mother, Pam, spoke to 48 Hours in 1996 and said, "They're probably out there leading life as normal as they've ever had, and ours is never going to be the same." To them, it just wasn't fair that the killer or killers were out there living their life as if nothing had happened, just running around out and about while the family is over here grieving. They're wondering, what happened to their girls, who did this, why did this happen. The case was pretty much stalled until October of 1999, 8 years after the murders. This is when the Austin Police Department arrested 4 men in connection to the murders of Eliza Thomas, Amy Ayers, and sisters Jennifer and Sarah Harbison. And police were pretty familiar with these 4 men. They were the same young men that police had questioned just 8 years earlier but had released due to lack of evidence. Forrest Welburn, Maurice Pierce, Michael Scott, and Robert Springsteen. Now, when Detective John Jones heard about these arrests, he was feeling very excited. He was ready to grab his green and white shirt, put it on, and let the families know that this case was finally closed. But before he could pull his shirt out, he needed to learn more. Why did it take 8 years for these 4 men to be arrested? What new evidence did they find to connect these men to the murders? Well, it turns out that there was no new evidence that connected these men to the murders. The only thing that police had was 2 newly obtained confessions, one from Michael Scott and another from Robert Springsteen. When Detective John heard that all they had were 2 new confessions, he didn't even bother to pull out the green and white shirt because he honestly didn't feel too confident about these arrests. Over the past 8 years, 6 people had already falsely confessed to these murders, so John didn't really feel too confident about these new confessions. So let's talk about these confessions. We'll start off by talking about Michael Scott. His confession came first, and he was questioned for over 4 days. And this is a story that he gave to police. The night of the murders, Michael, Robert, Maurice, and Forrest were at the food court in the North Cross Mall, which is the same mall that Sarah and Amy had gone to earlier that night. While they were at the food court, the 4 men were talking about how they really needed to get some money, and that's when one of them suggested committing a robbery. They all agreed that a robbery was the best way to get some money, so they got inside Maurice's car and they started driving around the neighborhood. That's when they came across the yogurt shop and decided that that would be the perfect location to commit the robbery. They parked outside the yogurt shop, and Michael, Robert, and Maurice all got down while Forrest waited inside the car as a lookout. When they got to the yogurt shop, Maurice placed an order while Michael and Forrest went to the back of the store to use the restroom. However, instead of actually using the restroom, they opened the back door, propped it open with a pack of cigarettes, and planned to come back later that night. So after setting everything up, the 4 men got back inside their car, drove back to the mall, and just waited there until the yogurt shop would close at 11 p.m. Once 11 p.m. came along, the 4 men got back inside the car, drove back to the yogurt shop, and once again, Maurice, Michael, and Robert got down while Forrest waited as a lookout. Maurice was armed with a black .22 caliber revolver, and Robert had a small semi-automatic pistol that Michael believes was a .380. So the 3 of them entered the yogurt shop through the back door, and when they walked inside, they were surprised to see Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy still inside. Michael says that they assumed that the store would be empty, so finding the girls inside completely changed their plan. Robert ordered Michael to go to the front of the store to make sure that the door was locked and that there were no customers in the front, and meanwhile, him and Maurice would stay in the back, controlling the girls and trying to find the money. So Michael heads over to the front of the store and sees that the front door is locked and that the keys to the door are actually still in the keyhole. And as he was doing this, he heard Maurice yelling at the girls, demanding they tell him where they put the money. One of the girls replied saying, "It's already been dropped and you can't get to it." Then he heard one of the girls get slapped across the face. Robert then yelled at Michael to come to the back of the store and help him control the girls. When he got there, he says that Robert was removing the girls' clothing and that they used the clothing to tie up the girls. As they were doing this, the girls were crying and begging not to be killed. After tying the girls up, Michael went back to the front of the store to keep a lookout, and he could hear Maurice and Robert yelling at the girls. He could hear Maurice yelling, "Where's the money? I know you have the money." And then all of a sudden, Michael heard a gunshot. He ran to the back of the store to see what had happened, and that's when he saw one of the girls lying on the floor dead. Maurice then repeated the same question to another girl and then once again fired another shot. Now, while Maurice was doing this, Robert was sexually assaulting one of the girls. He even asked Michael to take the other girl that was still alive and begin assaulting her as well. But apparently Michael told him, "No, that's not what we came for," and that made Robert angry. So because Michael was scared of what Robert might do to him if he didn't follow his order, he walked over to the other girl and just pretended to have sex with her. After this, Maurice handed him the revolver and told him to finish her. Michael grabbed the gun and shot the girl in the back of the head. However, she was still alive. So that's when Robert grabbed the gun and shot her for a second time, which ultimately ended her life. Then they piled the bodies on top of each other, sprayed them with lighter fluid, and lit the building on fire. Michael says that he remembers being in the yogurt shop for about 20 minutes, and he says that he never wanted for any of this to happen. Moving over to Robert's confession, he pretty much corroborated everything that Michael had said. As for Forrest and Maurice, when they were interrogated, they never confessed to anything. They continued to deny having any involvement in the murders, and since there really wasn't any physical evidence tying them to the crime, the prosecutor didn't really have a strong case against them, so eventually the charges against Forrest and Maurice were dropped. Now, the only two people left that were able to go to trial were Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott. And again, the only evidence that police had against them was their confessions. And with this, the families and the prosecutors felt that they had a very strong case against the two men. Then, 10 years after the murders in 2001, the trials began. Roberts was first, and his defense attorney, James Sawyer, said that the only thing tying his client to these murders was his confession. His lawyer argued that the confession was 100% coerced and that there was no way his client could have done this. He believes that the only reason his client confessed is because he was tired of the interrogation. He had already been questioned for hours, and he was most likely thinking, "You know what? I'll tell them what they want to hear." He states that his client is innocent and that there's no way he could have done this. So Robert's trial lasted over a week, and after 13 hours of deliberation, the jury came back with the verdict. They had found Robert Springsteen guilty of capital murder and had sentenced him to death. Once Robert's trial concluded, it was now time for Michael's. His defense was aimed at discrediting the confession he had given to police. He argued that his confession was the product of an overbearing police interrogation. And you can actually watch Robert and Michael's confessions because they were recorded. I don't know if you can see the whole confession, but you are able to see like 2 to 3 minutes of it on YouTube. So I will link that down below if you guys want to check it out. During his interrogation, you can see that one of the officers is on video getting all up in Michael's face and shouting at him, "Come on, Michael, you're doing good. Tell us, let's do this today." And at one point, the detective grabs his gun and puts it against Michael's head and asks him, "Is this what you did to the girls?" At another time, one of the detectives yelled, "You know what you did, just tell us the truth. We know you were there and we know that you stuck your dick in one of the girls." Once people saw that interrogation footage and saw that the detective had put a to Michael's head, a lot of people began to doubt his confession. They wondered if maybe this was a false confession and maybe Michael was tired of being, tormented and, he had been in that room for 4 days now, so maybe he did confess just to be able to, make it stop, be released. And that's exactly what Michael argued during trial. He states that his description of the murders was constantly evolving as he was trying to please his interrogators. He states that he never accurately described the inside of the yogurt shop. At first, he said the girls' hands were tied with an extension cord. Then he changed it to say that they were tied with napkins, and then he finally changed it to say that they were tied with their own clothing. He also claimed that one of the girls was killed inside the office inside the yogurt shop, which was not true. So there were some inconsistencies within his confession, but at the same time, there were also a lot of accurate details that he had given. For example, he knew that the front door was locked and that the keys to the front door were still inside the keyhole. He knew that the back door had been propped open. He knew that one of the girls had survived the initial shot and that they had to shoot her a second time to ensure she was dead, which was true. Amy Ayers did survive the first shot. So even though he did get some details correct, Michael still tried to argue that his confession was 100% coerced, but in the end, the jury found Michael Scott guilty of murder and sentenced him to life in prison. The girls' families felt a sigh of relief and were so happy that this chapter of their lives had finally ended. It had been 10 years since their beautiful daughters were brutally murdered, and now they finally had some justice. However, that sense of relief didn't last long. 5 years after the trials concluded, the families received shocking news. In a 5-4 decision, a court overturned Michael and Robert's convictions on the grounds that their constitutional rights were violated during the trial. The Sixth Amendment gives defendants the right to confront their accusers, and during their trial, Michael and Robert weren't allowed to question each other in court. So, because of that and a couple of other factors, a court believed that their constitutional rights were violated and that their convictions needed to be overturned. Now, even after this decision was made, that didn't mean that Michael and Robert were immediately released from prison. The district attorney at the time, Rosemary Lemberg, was determined to retry them. She honestly felt that Robert and Michael were responsible for the murders. So before she would release them from prison, she wanted to see if she could find any other evidence that would firmly connect them to the murders. It turns out that during the girls' autopsies, the ME had done a vaginal swab of all 4 victims, and on one of the girls, they had found partial male DNA. Now, back then in 1991, DNA testing wasn't as advanced. But now, 15 years later, there was this new technology called YSTR testing. It was still fairly new at the time, and this technology searches only for male DNA. So they ran this test, and when the results came back, it revealed that the partial male DNA found on one of the girls did not match the DNA of any of the 4 men arrested for the murders. It didn't match Maurice Pierce, it didn't match Forrest Welburn, and it didn't match Michael Scott or Robert Springsteen. So after finding this new evidence, the district attorney Rosemary dropped the charges against Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen, and after nearly 10 years behind bars, the 2 men were released. Robert Springsteen did an interview with 48 Hours, and the interviewer straight up asked him, "Did you have anything to do with the murders at the yogurt shop?" And he said, "No, never." He reportedly filed a petition requesting a court judgment acquitting him of the yogurt shop murders, and he had also sued the state of Texas. If he had won this lawsuit, he could have potentially received up to $700,000. Now, when Amy's brother Sean heard about the lawsuit, he was so angry. He said, "You murdered my sister and now you want to get paid for it? That's not going to work." The families of the 4 girls were so angry at the fact that Michael and Robert had been released and that now they were back to square one. They also couldn't believe that Michael and Robert were claiming that their rights had been violated. Just hearing that made the families so angry, and Eliza's mother, Maria, said that every time she heard those words, that their rights were violated, she just felt like she was going insane. She said, quote, "They say their rights were violated, but our girls were murdered." Now, as for Michael, Robert, and Forrest, they're pretty much living a low-profile life now. We're not really sure what they're up to, where they are, what happened to them after all of this concluded. What we do know is that in 2010, Maurice Pierce was killed by a police officer after being stopped for a traffic stop violation. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think about this. Do you think that they were wrongfully accused and wrongfully convicted, or do you think that they actually had something to do with the murders and they just got away with it? So after all this had happened, the investigation needed to continue. These 4 girls still needed justice, their families were still looking for answers, and the people responsible for this were still out there living their life as if nothing had happened. However, the only viable piece of evidence that police really had was this partial male DNA. That was it. All they needed to do was find a match, and hopefully that would lead them closer to the person responsible for the crime. So in 2017, Austin Police Detective Jay Swan learned that the National Center for Forensic Science at the University of Central Florida operated a YSTR database containing over 29,000 samples for population research. So feeling hopeful that if he submitted the partial DNA to this database, maybe a match would come back. And he was right. There was a match. Now, there wasn't a name attached to this DNA because any donations made were anonymous, so they weren't able to see whose DNA this belonged to, but they did see that this DNA was submitted by an FBI forensic analyst. So they were hopeful that the FBI would cooperate with the police and hopefully give them the name of the person that made this donation. However, when they reached out to the FBI for help, they said no. There was a law that required officials to protect the identity for any anonymous donor whose DNA was submitted to the Florida database for population research. So the FBI basically said, we would love to help you, but we legally can't. This was so frustrating for police and for the family. I mean, the FBI had this vital information and they weren't willing to give it up. At one point, Amy's sister-in-law called the FBI and begged them to release the information. She felt that if maybe the FBI heard from the families directly, they would feel more inclined to help out and, just overlook this law and release the name. She said, quote, "There are 4 dead girls, 4 families that have gone through 29 years of hell, and you're sitting on information." The families just felt like the law was protecting the criminal more than the families. So detectives started to grow more and more frustrated, and that's when they reached out to Texas Congressman McCall for help. He began pressuring the FBI, and after a 3-year standoff, the FBI finally agreed to help. Now, the original male DNA found on one of the girls had only 16 markers, which isn't a lot. Normally, you would like to have at least 24 in order to make a more accurate test and a more accurate match, because millions of people could have those same 16 markers. So they wanted to do some more testing to see if they could find more markers. In 2020, the FBI did further testing, and this resulted in 25 markers being found on the DNA. So now instead of only having 16, they had 25, and this was going to be way more helpful for the police. Now, while it's great that this new testing did lead to some new markers being found, it also did lead to some disappointing news. The additional markers found did not match the DNA found in the Florida database. So that was disappointing for the families and for the detectives, but at the same time, they now had a more stable and more developed DNA sample, and all they needed to do was find a match. Just because it didn't belong to the DNA found in the Florida database doesn't mean that this DNA didn't belong to someone else. This DNA literally belongs to someone, and hopefully with DNA testing becoming so advanced, police will eventually find a match. Now, members of Michael and Robert's defense team believe that this DNA sample might belong to the 2 men seen inside the yogurt shop the night of the murders. The 2 men that were seen inside the store, buying a can of soda, sitting at the booth whispering to each other while the girls cleaned up and closed up the shop. How is it possible that after 30 years, police have never been able to identify these 2 men? If these 2 guys were innocent, they've had plenty of years to come forward, talk to police, identify themselves, and clear up any confusion. But no, these 2 men have never come forward, and it honestly makes you wonder why. Is it because they're guilty of something? I don't know, but I definitely feel like police need to look further into the 2 men. As for the families of the 4 girls, they are still waiting for answers. Eliza's sister, Sonora, who was only 13 when her sister was murdered, said, quote, "There is a kind of torture that continues by the fact that it's unsolved and it's ongoing." She said that every year that goes by, she gets further and further away from her sister, and she's worried about losing memories with her. As for Amy's family, her brother Sean has his own kids now, and the family often wonders where they would be if Amy was still here. His kids might have had cousins, and they would have all been together laughing and just being happy. Over the years, they've learned to live with what happened, and even though they have good moments, they also have bad moments. They think about Amy every single day, and they won't give up looking for closure. Jennifer and Sarah's mother, Barbara, is hopeful that with new technology, they'll one day be able to discover who the DNA belongs to and finally find her daughter's killer. And as for Detective John Jones, he's confident that one day he'll pull out that green and white shirt and let the girls' families know that the case is closed. It's been over 30 years since Eliza Thomas, Amy Ayers, and sister Sarah and Jennifer Harbison were murdered, and to this day, their case remains unsolved. If you have any information related to this case, please contact the Austin Police Department at 512-477-3588 or contact Crime Stoppers at 512-472-TIPS. Amy's family says that it's been 30 years of not giving up, 30 years of trying. And if it takes 30 more years, then they'll wait 30 more years. The families are not giving up, and they know that one day their daughters will have justice. And with that, that is all the information that I have for today's video. It's a heartbreaking case, and I wish that the families had closure, and I wish that the girls had justice, but all we can do is continue to share their case, spread awareness, and just hope and pray that one day the killers will be caught. If there are ever any updates in this case, I will let you guys know by putting it in a pinned comment down below. Thank you guys again so much for being here and for listening to today's story. I truly appreciate all the love and support that you guys give this channel. And before we conclude today's video, let's announce our first Familia feature. Our first Familia feature goes out to Liliana Hernandez. Thank you so much, Liliana, for supporting this channel and for supporting the victims and the cases that I talk about. If you want to be featured in the next Familia feature, don't forget to click the subscribe button down below and come back to my next video. But alright, you guys, that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you guys again so much for being here, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys!